Good morning, Ayanda and Michelle, and to all your viewers too. Look, since March last year, we've been subjected to severe lockdown restrictions. And what we got to keep in mind is that the lockdown restrictions have never been a cure, but simply a stopgap measure. The vaccine, which has now arrived, has always been the cure to our problems. The problem is that, in my view, and many of the experts around South Africa's view, is that government has acted too slowly and not like many countries around the world to secure the vaccines timeously to avoid lengthy restrictions going forward.
Yeah, and perhaps timelessly is the operative word here. Constitutionally speaking, who decides what that time actually looks like? Because government's point of view is that they've acted as quickly as they can.
Yes, so we've got to look at the restrictions, and when your constitutional rights are restricted, we need to determine whether there is rationality associated with it. So your rights cannot be irrationally restricted. Now, since March last year, there have been severe restrictions, and these restrictions have been found as rational by the courts so far. But going forward, it might get to a stage where, if we are subjected to extended restrictions, which could have been lifted so much sooner had government acted swiftly, the rationality of these restrictions will then be called into question.
Now that we're here, though, does the circumstance not change? The time has lapsed. The opportunity, I presume, according to you, has been missed. But would it now become rational for government to continue with these lockdown restrictions, considering we don't even have enough vaccines as it stands, even just for our healthcare workers?
Well, the race around the world is on to secure herd immunity. Now, my understanding in South Africa is that would be approximately 40 million people, which equates to 67% of the population. Now, if you compare us to countries around the world, we are far behind the likes of the US and the UK, who have been rolling out their vaccines for quite some time now. But even if you look at the continent, we were behind Morocco, that secured their vaccines long before us. Guinea have already started the distribution. If you move over to the Middle East, Israel has been busy with it for quite some time. Turkey's already distributing as well. You look at the Asian countries, Australia, New Zealand. This has been going on for quite some time around the world. Now, the problem with this is that 1 million doses has now arrived. Government has now indicated that they've secured quite a bit more. But we need to reach the 40 million mark. And just by simply having the vaccine in the country doesn't mean that the restrictions are going to disappear overnight, because it takes quite a long time to actually distribute these vaccines and roll out the process.
Perhaps the long emphasized justification from government has been that we couldn't pre-order any vaccines because we didn't know essentially which one would work out, and that might be money that's lost, money we also don't have. Would that not stand as a justifiable reason behind how and why we got here?
I disagree with government in that regard,
Yeah.
because, again, if you look at the other countries around the world, they secured them timelessly. Moreover, we're now securing it through the Serum Institute in India at double, if not triple, the price that we could have secured if we had bilateral agreements with the big pharma companies around the world, like the other countries have done.
It's an interesting point you make, because, again, part of the reasons we're being told is because we're now trying to play catch up. If one were to try to take government to task on this, on what basis could it be done?
Well, it would be done on a constitutional basis. Again, one would have to look at whether government's actions are rational, whether they could have acted earlier, and what the result of their delay in acting is. Many businesses are suffering. Our economy is on the brink of collapse. The healthcare system, you just have to look at the social media pictures, and you can look at the hospitals where people are being hosted outside. The facilities, they're on the brink of collapse. And, if you look at the certain rights that are being affected by the delay, you talk about your right to medical treatment, your right to life, your right to freedom of movement, your right to education. I mean, we've seen that the schools are being delayed. They already only completed 70% of their curriculum last year, with the view of completing the other 30% this year. But now the schools are delayed in opening. So the chances of catching up on that 30% is very slim, in my opinion.
Right. JP, in an ideal context, these rights are not in conflict, but in the context of a global health crisis, they are. I mean, we need to somehow also appreciate that navigating or negotiating the right, for instance, to education and the right to life is not necessarily the most clear-cut thing. I wonder what would present a court in a hypothetical scenario with an argument that suggests that, government very clearly violated this right for an unjustifiable reason.
Look, so obviously we're dealing with a pandemic. Government, it's a first for our government and all the governments around the world. So one has to now judge them retrospectively, which is not always fair to do. But I mean, if you compare apples to apples and look what our government has done compared to other governments around the world, it just seems that we have been behind in securing the vaccines, and now are paying for it by securing them at exorbitant prices, where the countries around the world have secured those agreements a long time ago.
Well, now that we're here, what ought to be the path of least destruction, for lack of a better term, for government to take in order to ensure that there's as minimized collateral damage as possible?
Well, unfortunately, the restrictions are going to be here to stay. It will vary between the different levels because, we expect further waves going forward until we reach the goal of herd immunity, that 67% that we all hoping for. That's why there's, which I referred to earlier, the race around the world to reach herd immunity, to lift the restrictions, because we're not the only country living in restrictions. But the point is that other countries are going to be free from restrictions a lot quicker than we are.
Well, it was always going to be a contentious issue. Thanks very much for your take on this matter. Really appreciate it on the AM report. Jean-Paul Rudd is a partner at Adams & Adams. That's a law firm. Jean-Paul, thanks very much indeed.